Hello, it is page 7th grade science, page 405 and 406. Sorry, get coordinated here. Which we're talking about inheritance and genes, and not the genes that you put on, but genes as in that little single piece of information stored in your chromosomes in your DNA. And we talked about before on page 402 heredity, the transmission of characteristics from the parents to the offspring. And that's what we're going to go a little bit more into. Remember, we also talked about there's two different types of reproduction. And so that, depending upon which type of reproduction, you would have mitosis and meiosis, which you can look at and review on page 403. Then we talked about really, it was supposed to be 404, 405, 406, but that's a lot of information, so that's why I did it in two different videos. Making sure you understand, or, I don't even understand the exact process of replication, translation, transcription, translation. As far as just like wrapping my head around it, it's just basically what, these geneticists have taught us, and of course, there's lots and lots of information out there on this. And on page 404, if you look at those little diagrams there of replication where the DNA is copied into two identical strands of DNA, and then transcription, the DNA is copied into RNA, and then translation, it is the RNA is telling the ribosomes to make a protein of some sort. So always, keep reviewing each day, and that will help you as well. So let's talk about inheritance. All right, Gregor Mendel, he was an Austrian monk who discovered a lot about heredity. He's known as the father of genetics. And in 1853, he actually studied a lot about pea plants. And as he was doing this and trying to figure out traits and genetics and all of that about it all, he really helped us to understand more about genetics. And so a gene for a particular trait is called an allele. So if you have a particular trait from your parents, you have different kinds of alleles. But we're going to look at the pea plant. That's what he did at first. So we're going to look at the pea plant at first. So if you have two alleles for the same seed color, in a pea plant, like yellow and green. So the two colors for peas are yellow and green. Have you ever seen a yellow pea? It's kind of yellowish looking. But anyway, so you have the yellowish look to it there, and then the darker green one as well. And so they have two different kinds. So one allele is yellow, one is for yellow seeds, and one allele would be for green seeds. So if the parent plants that they produced in the lab or whatever, if they both have, they say I'm going to take a green seed and a green seed, then they both have alleles for the green seed, it's going to be called homozygous, because we've talked about it before. The same, right? We talk about same is homo, and the zygote is where you've got the fertilized egg cell there. And so it's talking about reproduction. So homozygous, they have two of the exact same type of allele. So let's say my mom and dad both have brown hair. Then they have two different alleles that they gave me for brown hair. Now if they have different alleles, so for a pea plant, it would be a yellow seed and a green seed that they've put together in the lab, then it's considered heterozygous. All right, so two different. Hetero means different. And so that's two different alleles. So same kind of idea. Let's say my dad has brown eyes and my mom had blue eyes. Then they would be heterozygous, and usually it would go to what they call the dominant trait. All right, so back up for just a minute. Remember, so any kind of one single particular trait. So brown eyes, that's one allele. Blue eyes, one allele. Hazel eyes, one allele. Brown hair, one allele. Red hair, one allele. Blonde hair, one allele. So those are alleles. If your parents both have and give you two of the same allele, it's called homozygous. two different ones, it's called heterozygous. All right, so wrap your mind around that. Make sure you understand it first, okay? Then we go on to some laws of heredity that Gregor Mendel came up with. So first of all, the law of dominance. And the law of dominance says that each allele that is doing a different... I'm going to tell Braden's coming in, and so I'm going to tell him that I'm doing lessons in the kitchen. So anyway, if you have a dominant trait, so the dominant trait means they basically figured that out. Geneticists have figured it out. Brown eyes are dominant. So if there's a brown-eyed and a blue-eyed person, it is way more likely that the children will have brown eyes. Now, my parents both have brown eyes, and my oldest sister and I have brown eyes, but my middle sister, Laura, she has blue eyes. So she did not get that dominant trait. But for the most part, what they're saying, it's not saying it's 100% all the time. It's saying that you have a dominant trait. So it's most likely going to be brown eyes is the idea there. So that's the law of dominance. Gregor Mendel gave us that law. And so a dominant trait, the one that's going to show up the most, is going to be dominant. All right. And the one that doesn't show up,
make sure to like and subscribe,
is recessive gene. All right, so a recessive trait. So it doesn't appear in the offspring as likely when that dominant allele is present there. All right, so those are some laws of heredity there. So dominant alleles are going to be represented when we do Punnett squares. Hopefully when we get back, they're going to be represented by a capital letter. So all dominant alleles are capital letters, all right? So let's say we give a letter A, capital A, to brown eyes. And then we would give a little b, or a little a to blue eyes, right? It didn't really matter what letter it is. It could be a capital Z for brown eyes, a little z for blue eyes. It's whatever you decide is going to be that particular letter. So, if it is homozygous for green seeds, then let's say we do GG, capital G, because green seeds are actually less dominant, which that does make sense, but it's a yellowish seed. Anyway, so the yellow seeds are going to be more dominant, and let's say it has two different ones, it's going to be capital Y. So it's got two different yellows that they're breeding there together. Breeding's not the word. They're crossing there together. Anyway, then you have homozygous, let's say for green, that would be little y. All right, so then let's say what would we do for heterozygous? We would have a green seed and a yellow seed, and that would be capital Y, little y. All right, you'll need to know those later for the Punnett squares. That's why we're talking to you a little bit about that now. It'd be much easier if I had you in the classroom. But anyways, so that's how we're going to do it, though. So the capital and lowercase letters are called genotypes. The genotypes. This is the actual combination of alleles. Remember, allele is a gene for a particular trait. So genotypes, the actual combination of alleles that the organism has for a particular trait. All right, so let's say that the parents, go back to the parents, have brown eyes, and one of them has brown eyes, one of them has blue eyes. All right, so the brown-eyed, let's say it's a capital B, and the blue eyes, right here it is a little b, and so that is considered a heterozygous. Just press off. Thanks. So the capital and lowercase are going to be described as that genotype. That is what in your genetics, in your DNA, your dad gave you the gene for blue eyes or brown eyes, whichever, and your mom gave you the gene for blue eyes. So that's called your genotype. All right. Then the actual appearance from the results that you get basically is called the phenotype. Now I remember that because pH is phenotype and pH is physical characteristic. So what you actually got. So do you have brown eyes? Then that's your phenotype. If you have blue eyes, that's your phenotype. You got the recessive trait for some odd reason. And some people do that. And and so, so on and so forth. So Mendel discovered when two pea plants are heterozygous for seed color, so that means the capital Y, little y, then they're crossed, and offspring can have, excuse me, any of the genotypes, which would be capital Y, capital Y, capital Y, little y, little y, little y. All right, but then it depends on the percentage, which is what we'll get to when we get into Punnett squares. All right, so that's a lot of information on page 405. Alleles, particular traits. Homozygous, that means the parents have both the same type of trait, brown eye, brown eye. Heterozygous means that they have the different kinds, so blue eyes, brown eyes. Dominance, the law of dominance is usually the dominant trait is going to be present and it's going to take over more. And so that's the dominant trait. The lesser one that doesn't show up as much is the recessive trait. And then the genotype, it's just the actual combination of alleles that your parents had for you, or the parent plant had or the parent of the animal, or whatever it may be that you're looking at. And then the phenotype is what is actually showing up in the characteristics there. All right, just a little bit, page 406, just the law of segregation and law of independent assortment. These are also laws that Gregor Mendel came up with and at least began, and then they were and he discovered it, and then people have advanced on it since then. And so in general, when two heterozygous organisms are crossed, an offspring is equally likely to receive either allele. This is the principle, it's called the law of segregation. Okay, this one, the law of segregation. And then the law of independent assortment says that the allele inherited for one trait is going to be unrelated to the allele inherited for another trait. So the law of independent assortment, it's pretty easy. Basically, if you get your mom's brown eyes, all right, then that doesn't mean you're going to get her brown hair. You might get your dad's red hair. Or if you get nice olive skin tone, that doesn't mean that you're going to still get what from your mom. Then you're still not going to get every single trait from your mom. You might get some traits from your dad, some traits from your mom. So that's law of independent assortment. And if you think about those words, it's independently assorting the traits, and that kind of helps you out with that. We'll get into the law of segregation a little bit more when we talk about Punnett squares and that kind of thing. And basically, you have an equal chance if you have a heterozygous allele or genotype. You have an equal chance of possibly getting whatever that is. Now, how does that relate to the law of dominance? That's basically just saying most of the time you're still going to get that dominant trait. So it's they're almost seem contradictory. But like I said, when I show you this stuff on the Punnett squares and the percentage that you can get, which if you want to look at this, that's fine. There's Punnett square stuff on YouTube as well. But I want you to understand more of page 404, 405, law of independent assortment as well. And then that will help you to get through there. And then I want you to, for the next lesson, I think that's Friday's lesson, it's basically just to read page 411. And I'm not really going to do a lesson on here on that. I just want you to read that. It's a green box there. And then do whatever whatever I'm assigned for that day. But I also want you just to try to watch some other videos that day on here that I've put onto this channel and that kind of thing. But then it's a long section review, so you may want to start working on that get ahead on all that. So once you are done with that through 11.2, that brings us right into spring break, and you have no work for me for spring break. Just make sure your work is done all the way up through 11.2. And I ask if you can, if it's possible, and if we're still allowed to by then, to drop off those section reviews and any of your worksheets and quizzes that you've done by April 2nd in the little foyer there at school in my box. So that will really help, and I hope you have a good rest of the week and stay safe.